Hello everyone, welcome to today's lesson. Today's lesson we are focusing on the difference between a floating exchange rate and a fixed exchange rate. So let's get going. So the first thing that you have to know is that we did talk about a floating and a fixed exchange rate, and we say that a floating exchange rate is that type of exchange that is determined by the forces of demand and supply, whereas a fixed exchange rate is the one which is fixed by the government by using large currency reserves of foreign currency and their own local currency. So let's start with floating exchange rate here on the left hand side. So it's driven by simply by supply and demand. This is where the market forces of demand and supply will influence the price of a currency, the value of a currency, the exchange rate of a currency. Then it changes freely because it uses the force of demand and supply. How well your country is performing, you're going to see your currency appreciating in value. And if your country is not doing very well, you're going to see your country depreciating in value in terms of the exchange rate. So there's little government control because the market forces, as you know, there is no one who can predict, who can time the market, and no one who can control the market. The market forces are the one who determines the value when you are talking about a floating exchange rate, right? Then there's going to be an increase in demand of a currency, which is going to increase its value that we talked about this before. A increase in supply of a currency will lead to a fall in value of a currency in terms of depreciation. But when demand is increasing for a currency, which means your currency is being highly demanded, that actually makes the currency appreciate in value, which increases the exchange rate. So then also some of the benefits of pursuing a floating exchange rate is that there is flexibility, as you say, that the markets are the one who decides the value of your currency, and also there's self-correcting, which means using floating exchange rate clearly shows that a country's performance, how are you performing, which means in terms of self-correcting, which means if your currency is going to be doing a depreciation, then you've improved your output, you've improved your quality of your goods and services that you're delivering. You've also improved in terms of even the policies that you're now implementing in your country, opening yourself up. You're going to see even the floating exchange rate correcting itself and being able to benefit the country in the long term. Then some of the negatives of using a floating exchange rate is that it's unstable because, as you can see, no one can control the floating exchange rate because we are letting it to the market force to decide. What if that then, in the long run, causes a massive deterioration of the value of the currency of a country, which is going to affect in the long term in terms of growth potential, in terms of potential gains that can be trickled down to ordinary citizens in that country. This is going to be a problem. Then lastly, risky for business, because remember, businesses also have a business cycle that they're supposed to look at whenever they are trying to plan ahead in terms of their spending. So the business needs to be able to have a stable environment which they can plan and be able to buy certain resources that they're going to use in their business, knowing that the currencies that they're using are going to be stable. But it's very difficult to know if you're any country which is failing to compete, to have a competitive advantage to other countries, which makes business at risk when they're using a floating exchange rate in that country. Okay, let's move on to the fixed exchange rate. So this is set by the government. Like I have said before, the government is the one who sets the fixed exchange rate using large currency reserves of foreign currency and domestic currencies. So also expect to a currency. So the fixed exchange rate, its notion is trying to protect a local currency, trying to give it value, trying to give it stability, that the country and its residents can trust the currency and they're able to use it knowing that it's going to be stable in value. So the benefits, as you can see, there's control bank intervention. Usually the central banks of governments are the one who controls the fixed exchange rate. And as you can see right now in Zimbabwe, we have a fixed exchange rate of 26 equivalent to $1 US. This is our fixed exchange rate. Then in terms of the benefits that come as a result of fixed exchange rate is that there's stability, there's predictability. It's predictable, meaning to say that we can be able to transact knowing that the value of the fixed exchange is going to continue to remain as it is, which allows us to plan, which allows us to know that in any given point of time, nothing is going to change on our exchange rate. The way I'm going to be buying goods and services is going to be the same. Okay. Then the negatives is that the government, it requires resources. Like I say, that a fixed exchange rate to maintain, you should have large currency reserves, either of gold, either of foreign currency, either of the local currency. This needs resources for you to maintain a fixed exchange rate. Then it's also less flexible. There's a less flexibility if you are going to be using a fixed exchange rate because it actually has a certain level in which even prices of exchange is supposed to increase or decrease, which allows us to promote some level of inflexibility in terms of the currency manipulation. So that actually contribute to problems in an economy where you can have a currency that is very more less flexible, which is become difficult even for investors to move their money, or in terms of liquidity is going to be a problem trying to move investment from one country to the other if you are having a country that uses a fixed exchange rate system. Then lastly, let's look at which one is better between the two. As you can see right now, the floating exchange rate, this one, that is the one we first started with, it has some of the benefits, which means it's much more required when you are having a strong economy. In strong economies usually use the floating exchange rate because they really want to have a true value of a currency to be able to buy, to transact, looking at the confidence of the business and the consumer confidence. Are they buying it through that confidence and looking at the value that is being backed by the floating exchange rate? But if you look at the fixed exchange rate, it's all about stability, whereby you are trying to have a developing country, where you're trying to focus on promoting your own local currency, trying to protect it, trying to see how best can you promote stability and the use of local currency, promote your own domestic economy. You are supposed to use the fixed exchange rate. But each and every one of them, they have their benefits, they have their limitations. So usually governments all around the world, they use what you call a managed exchange rate system, where they use the benefits of both worlds. In some instances, they'll use the floating exchange rate. In some instances, they'll use the fixed exchange rate. So this is the discussion about the fixed and floating exchange rate. It covered perfectly. I'll see you in the next video when you talk about the purchasing power parity theory. Goodbye.